Some time ago, we showed the dark side of Paraguay here on the channel, an episode that is part of our series where we reveal the most unknown and little discussed corners of the world. And as we always remind you, this series is never meant to belittle any country. It exists to show that every place has stories that end up hidden behind the landscapes, postcards, and what reaches us on the surface. But every coin has two sides, and if one day we open the doors to Paraguay's darkest mysteries, today we turn that map upside down to see the other side. The curious side, the surprising side, the side that mixes indigenous tradition with modernity, joy with simplicity, and some oddities that could only be born in such a unique country. Today, Bello Mundo will take you to discover Paraguay, the strangest and happiest country in South America. Number 1. Location and general information. Paraguay is a landlocked country in the heart of South America. It borders Brazil, Bolivia, and Argentina, and is one of the few countries on the continent that does not have access to the sea. But this lack of coastline does not mean isolation. In practice, rivers have always been Paraguay's major highways. They carry cargo, people, food, trade, and even part of the country's identity. The Paraguay River cuts through the country from north to south, and the Paraná River forms the natural border with Brazil. It is precisely on this stretch of the Paraná that one of the most impressive constructions in South America is located, the Itaipu hydroelectric plant, a binational operation that is half Brazilian and half Paraguayan. During the tour of the plant, it is even difficult to tell where one country ends and the other begins. So integrated are the two banks. In terms of size, the country has just over 154,000 square miles. That's almost the same size as California, one of the most famous states in the United States. In other words, it's not a small country, nor is it large. Let's say it's compact. Almost the entire population is concentrated in the eastern part. That is where the big cities, economic centers, plantations, and the capital, Asunción, one of the oldest in South America, are located. The climate is humid, the land is fertile, and the rivers are full. It is where life pulsates. The western part, on the other hand, seems like another country. There lies the Paraguayan Chaco, a vast and practically empty region. The heat easily exceeds 40 degrees Celsius. The roads are long, and the landscape changes between dry forests and areas that flood during the rainy season. There are many villages that still follow their own traditions, and a large part of the population is indigenous or Mennonite. This mixture of fertile fields, isolated regions, and powerful rivers does not only form a curious map, it is the starting point for one of the most unbelievable countries in South America, and you will understand why when we start exploring these places. Number 2. Places. Paraguay does not appear in travel itineraries when it comes to South America, but those who decide to give it a chance discover a country full of contrasts, historical ruins, and surprising landscapes. The trip can start in Asunción, the capital. It is located on the banks of the Paraguay River and has that old-town feel mixed with the modern capital of a small country. It has colonial squares, museums, popular markets, and wide streets with huge trees. In the historic center, the highlight is the National Pantheon of Heroes, which houses the remains of important figures in Paraguayan history. Nearby, you can visit the Palacio de los López, the seat of government overlooking the river. But just head to the easternmost part of the country to find one of Paraguay's most impressive sights, the Munday Falls. The Munday River flows calmly until it plunges into several parallel falls, creating a wall of water, foam, and constant mist. It is smaller than Foz do Iguaçu, but it has its own power. From the walkways, you can see the water hitting the dark rocks and hear the roar echoing through the valley. It is one of the most striking places in the Triple Border region, and curiously, one of the least publicized. Following the same route, the next mandatory stop is the Itaipu Dam, which we just mentioned. It is the largest binational hydroelectric plant in the world, shared between Brazil and Paraguay. On the Paraguayan side, the tour passes through technical areas and panoramic viewpoints that show the absurd scale of the work. Nearby, there is another gem, the Jesuit ruins of Trinidad and Jesus, declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. These are giant 17th century buildings, erected by Jesuit priests together with the Guarani people. Even in ruins, the arches, sculptures, and stone details impress any visitor. If the idea is to see nature, Paraguay also delivers. Abicuí National Park has hidden waterfalls, trails among tall trees, and old iron furnaces used in the 19th century, reminders of a time when Paraguay was an industrial powerhouse. Further north, the regions of Serranias de Cazapa and Ibitiruzu hide caves, natural viewpoints, and areas of Atlantic forest that are rarely mentioned in travel guides. And for those who want to experience something completely different, the destination is the Paraguayan Chaco. Long roads, isolated farms, indigenous villages, extreme heat, and unique biodiversity. It is a huge region with landscapes reminiscent of savanna, dry forest, and areas that flood during part of the year. Many people describe the Chaco as a country within a country. These places alone would be enough to make it a respectable tourist destination. But if nature attracts attention, history explains why this country is so different from everything around it. Number 3. History. Long before the arrival of Europeans, the territory that is now Paraguay was occupied by the Guarani people. They lived in villages scattered along the rivers, grew cassava, corn, and sweet potatoes, fished, hunted, and maintained a deep spiritual connection with the forest. The land, water, and animals were part of the same sacred universe, inhabited by entities that explained illnesses, harvests, dreams, and everything that happened around them. In the 16th century, the Spanish arrived. The founding of Asunción in 1537 transformed the region into a crucial point in South America. The city was nicknamed the Mother of Cities because expeditions departed from there to establish settlements in Argentina, Uruguay, and even southern Brazil. But the most striking element of this period was not territorial expansion. It was the direct clash between indigenous culture and the Spanish colonial project, which altered customs, social organization, and even the relationship with the land. In the 17th century, the Jesuit reductions began. The priests established communities where thousands of Guarani began to live under the guidance of the church. These villages protected part of the population from wars and colonial slavery. But they also imposed European norms, restricted local traditions, disciplined labor, and replaced ancient rituals with Christian practices. It was a less violent system than that of the colonial farms, but still based on control and cultural domination. Independence came at the beginning of the 19th century. However, the most traumatic moment in Paraguayan history came soon after, when the country went to war with Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. The conflict began in 1864 and ended in 1870. During this period, cities were destroyed, a huge part of the population disappeared, and the country had to rebuild itself, practically from scratch. Even so, something remained. From this mixture of peoples, conflicts, and impositions, the basis of Paraguayan identity was born. And it is precisely this identity that appears in the way of speaking, living, and relating that we are going to learn about now. Number 4. Population, languages, and religion. Paraguay has just over 6 million inhabitants. It may seem small, but in cultural terms, it is one of the richest and most complex countries in South America. Most of the population is mestizo, descended from the Guarani indigenous people and Spanish colonizers. But here, this mixture did not stop halfway. It became a complete fusion. And you can see this in the language. The country is officially bilingual, and not just on paper. In everyday life, Guarani is as present as Spanish, if not more so. It is used in family conversations, in markets, in squares, on radio programs, and in political campaigns. Some children learn Guarani before Spanish, and this is not seen as a delay, but as a sign of identity. Even the country's currency is named after the Guarani. The fusion also appears in religion. The majority of the population is Christian, mainly Catholic, a direct legacy of colonization. But in the interior, Catholic rituals are mixed with indigenous traditions of protection, promises, and spiritual relationship with nature. The best example is the cult of the Virgin of Cacupe. Officially, she is the Catholic patron saint of the country, but her origin is a popular legend that mixes faith, fear, and miracles. According to popular tradition, a Guarani craftsman was fleeing from enemies when he hid behind a tree in the middle of the forest. Desperate, he made a promise to the Virgin Mary. If he got out alive, he would carve her image into the wood that protected him. He managed to escape and kept his promise. But here's an important detail. For the Guarani of that period, the forest was a sacred territory, full of protective entities, so the story was absorbed by indigenous customs and reinterpreted within their spiritual imagination. That is why she is seen as a symbol of two worlds, and for that very reason, she mobilizes crowds every year. This coexistence of such different roots also appears in habits, at the table, at parties, and in customs. That's what we're going to talk about now. Number 5. Customs and culture. You can already see that Paraguayan culture is a mixture of indigenous peoples and Spanish colonizers, right? It's a mixture in history, a mixture in religion, a mixture in language. So customs, of course, would also follow the same path. And food is perhaps the most obvious example of this fusion. The basis comes from the Guarani peoples: cassava, corn, pumpkin, sweet potatoes, and fish. All very connected to the land, to the cycles of nature. But then the colonizers arrived and brought milk, cheese, eggs, animal fat, oven techniques, iron pots, and all of this was added to the mix. Paraguayan soup, for example, despite its name, is not a soup at all. It's like a savory cake made with corn, cheese, milk, and onions. They say it was created by accident when they overcooked a traditional soup and it turned into dough. It turned out so well that it became a national symbol. Another classic is chipa, a horseshoe-shaped bread made with manioc starch, cheese, and eggs. The base is indigenous, but the recipe has gained Spanish touches over time. To drink, there is the famous tereré, which many people in Brazil, where the drink is consumed, think is just a cold chimarrão. But it is not. Tereré is an indigenous drink, created long before the arrival of Europeans, made with yerba mate and ice water. But what is interesting is how it functions in everyday Paraguayan life. It is not just a refreshment, it is a social ritual. Entire families sit in the shade, pass the guampa from hand to hand, talk, gossip, and solve life's problems. It is almost an analog social network, created centuries before WhatsApp existed. In music, the mix continues. Paraguayan polka has a European name but its own rhythm. It has harp, guitar, singing in Guarani, and accompanies dances that are the soul of popular festivals. But among all the creations, perhaps the most symbolic is Nyanduti lace. It is handmade with very fine threads and resembles a spider's web full of colors and designs. Legend has it that a young indigenous woman saw a spider weaving its web between two trees and tried to copy the design using thread and needle. It became art. It became culture. It became identity. And this blend of manual talent, improvisation, and indigenous heritage appears throughout the country. Sometimes in a recipe, sometimes in an object, sometimes in a story. And speaking of stories, some of them don't seem natural at all. Number 6. Beliefs, mysteries, and folklore. If Paraguay already seemed different up to this point, this is where it becomes another world. Because when we delve into beliefs and folklore, everything takes on a layer of strangeness, spirituality, and symbolism that exists nowhere else in Latin America. Much of this imagery comes from the Guarani people, who have always had a deep spiritual relationship with nature. Forests, rivers, animals, wind, thunderstorms. Everything has a spirit, everything has an owner, everything has a purpose. And when the colonizers arrived, many of these beliefs did not disappear. They merged with Catholic traditions and created a folklore that exists nowhere else on the continent. One of the best-known characters is Pombero, a spirit of the forest who walks at night with feet so soft that no one hears him. He protects animals, scares those who hunt too much, and loves to play tricks on those who do not respect nature. There are stories of people who have heard whistling coming from the forest, chickens that have disappeared without explanation, and tools that have moved around inside their own homes. Another famous being is Jasi Jatare, a blonde spirit with light eyes, a curious legacy of this mixture of Guarani myth and European influence. According to legend, he appears at noon when the heat is unbearable and lures children into the forest with candy and toys. Paraguayan mothers still use this story to prevent children from wandering off alone during the most dangerous time of day. There is also Luison, which many people say is the Paraguayan version of the werewolf. The youngest son of 7 brothers, cursed since birth, condemned to transform into a dark creature on dark nights. In rural communities, there are still those who avoid leaving their homes when the moon is too strange. These stories coexist with protective rituals that mix Catholic faith with indigenous beliefs. There are promises made to the Virgin of Cacupe, blessings in Guarani, and leaves burned to ward off evil spirits. And each region has its own version of the same myths, always with that classic warning, "I didn't see it, but my uncle did." It is this mixture of indigenous spirituality, ancestral fear, and popular religiosity that gives Paraguay this air of being a happy and strange country at the same time. And if the folklore is already different, wait until you see what happens when we enter the daily life of Paraguayans. Number 7. The strange side of everyday life. It is already clear that many things in Paraguay work differently. And it's not just the languages, the food, or the religious mix. Some rules of daily life also follow very peculiar paths here. For starters, Paraguay is one of the few countries in the world where it is easier to get married than to get divorced. Civil marriage is easy. Sign the papers and you're done. But if the couple decides to divorce, that's when things change. Just to give you an idea, until the early 1990s, divorce simply did not exist in law. Once you got married, it was supposed to be forever. There was no such thing as legally separating and moving on with your life. Paraguay was one of the last countries in the Americas to accept divorce, largely because of the influence of the Catholic Church in politics and society. When the law finally changed, separation became possible, but the cultural weight remained. The process is bureaucratic, long, full of steps and dirty looks. So much so that many people simply choose not to make the separation official. living with other people without ending their previous marriage. Many people still prefer to settle everything within the family, without a judge, without paperwork, without scandal. And what about letters? They also have their drama. The Paraguayan Postal Service has had a bad reputation both abroad and within the country. So much so that companies specializing in receiving, storing, and re-shipping parcels have sprung up. A classic case became an international joke. Packages sent from the United Kingdom that were supposed to go to Ascension Island ended up in Asunción, the capital of Paraguay. The confusion between the names even fooled the British, and it wasn't just once. In addition, as many people live in areas without house numbers or unnamed streets, people find a way around it. Some addresses include landmarks such as "Leave it at the house with the blue gate near the mango tree," or "Deliver to the farm with the white cross at the entrance." And it works. The mail carrier already knows the neighborhood. It is a country where even the rules of everyday life follow the logic of practical improvisation, but which, in the end, always works. Want another unusual rule? Paraguay has one of the lowest tax burdens on the continent. Companies and individuals pay, on average, about 10% of GDP in taxes. By comparison, in most Latin American countries, this figure ranges from 15 to 20%. In other words, Paraguay functions almost like a tax haven, with low taxes on practically everything, from what you pay in wages to everyday purchases. In addition, there are a number of incentives to attract foreign investment. But this model comes at a price. The government collects little revenue and ends up struggling to pay for infrastructure, health, and education. There is a lack of roads, schools, and hospitals. Many basic things are lacking, but one thing that is not lacking is happiness. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about now. Number 8. Strange and happy. After all this, it is clear that Paraguay is full of contrasts. It has a rich history, strong culture, impressive nature, unique traditions. But there is also another side. The country has been dealing with poverty, inequality, and corruption for decades, so long that many people call it structural. To understand these problems in depth, we have another video on the channel, The Dark Side, where all of this is unraveled in detail. But even with so many challenges, there is a surprising side to the country. In Gallup's international surveys, Paraguay repeatedly ranks among the happiest countries in the world. And this is where logic is turned upside down, because Paraguayan happiness has nothing to do with money, infrastructure, or efficient government. It comes from simple everyday life. From tereré in the shade, from conversations on the street, from community life, from the habit of living one day at a time. It is a happiness that does not depend on what is lacking and is based on what exists. Researchers explain that the Paraguayan people deal with life in a less anxious way and less based on expectations. Instead of looking to the future with demands, they look to the present with acceptance. And that, incredible as it may seem, makes a difference. That is why, even in the face of serious problems, Paraguay has extremely high rates of emotional well-being. Now that you know all this, do you understand why Paraguay is considered a strange and happy country? Isn't it fascinating? And that's it for today. So, which of these interesting facts about Paraguay surprised you? Tell us in the comments. And if you liked this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to Bello Mundo. See you in the next video.